Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Cifar Talks. My name is Hannah Jacobi, and I'm the Vice President of Communications at Cifar. I'll be your host for today. As many of you know, Cifar is a global research organization that is proudly based in Canada. We convene extraordinary researchers to address the most important and pressing issues facing science and humanity today. At Cifar, we believe in the power of diverse interdisciplinary communities of inquiry. Our community of researchers collaborates on bold ideas in order to share new and fundamental knowledge with the rest of the world. And that's precisely what our Cifar Talk series is all about. Today, with just 3 days left until COP28, our discussion will focus on a profoundly timely and important topic: climate change. You'll hear from researchers who, through working in diverse fields, share the common goal of making an impact on the environment. Before we officially begin the event, I'd like to share some logistical items with you. Please note that today's session will be an hour long. There will be an opportunity to pose your own questions at the end. You can do so by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please submit your questions there, and we will do our best to address them. And please note that this session is being recorded and will be available on our website at cifar.ca in the next week. And now it's my absolute pleasure to welcome our moderator for today, Cifar's President and CEO, Stephen Toop. As many of you know, prior to joining Cifar, Stephen served as the 346th Vice Chancellor at the University of Cambridge, where he was also the first non-UK national to hold the post. Prior to that, he was also the Director of the Monk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto, the President at the University of British Columbia, and the Dean of Law at McGill University. And of note for our discussion today, Stephen has just offered his latest book, which is titled A Rule of Law for a New Age of Anxiety, and which from his lens as a legal scholar offers up a possible solution for dealing with global issues like climate change. Welcome, Stephen. Over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Hannah. It's wonderful to join all of you, and I'm delighted to be moderating today's Cifar Talk, Nurturing a Resilient Earth. As Hannah mentioned, the discussion isn't just timely, it's also deeply important. We've surpassed the inflection point on climate change. Of course, we await the results of COP28 beginning in just a few days' time, but in the meantime, today we're in for a provocative discussion. You know that there's no silver bullet that can stop climate change. However, research innovation in this area could still have profoundly positive impact on our planet, and that will be the crux of our conversation today. So let me briefly introduce our panelists. Welcome first to Jackie Gourdiel in Canada, who examines how microbial life persists within extreme subsurface environments, such as permafrost, oceanic crust, and marine sediments. We're also joined by Sarah Gurr in the United Kingdom, whose interest is in plant disease, with particular emphasis on fungal infestations and their global movement. Hello as well to David Rolnick, also based in Canada, and who studies machine learning innovation for tackling climate change. Finally, I'd like to welcome Richard Taylor from the UK, but currently in California, whose work examines the impact of climate change, including the amplification of climate extremes on groundwater systems. So welcome to all of you. Well, as we've already heard, and we know from so many conversations, climate change is one of the most pressing issues of our time, if not the most pressing issue. What role do you think research organizations such as Cifar can play in addressing climate change? Sarah, why don't I start with you?
Well, good afternoon, everyone from the UK. So for me, it's an absolute delight and an honor to be part of Cifar because it seems to draw together the brightest minds within a given subject from across the globe. And as we tackle problems with climate change as being one of the most pressing issues of our time, the unit that I'm involved in is the fungal kingdom. And what we can see is that fungi are moving in concert with climate change, and they're profoundly affecting our calorie crops. They're also causing diseases. And so within the consortium in the fungal kingdom, suddenly there's this idea that we can all speak out of the box, and the ideas that we come up with are truly interdisciplinary within the fungal kingdom, and we can invite other people and be transdisciplinary. So this is a huge honor to be part of the Cifar, which makes a very significant contribution to the area of climate change studies.
Thanks, Sarah. Maybe I'll come to you, Richard. I'm curious from your perspective, what do you think research brings to bear on climate change and research organizations? What difference can we make?
Well, one of the key things, one of the things I find with research organizations and for instance, specifically with Cifar, is that it enables us to pursue curiosity-driven research. And that is hugely important. It's that often between and even across disciplines. And for me, I see this as an immensely important role as it allows for innovation. And we really require this if we're going to be tackling some of these major challenges around climate change. And it does this in a way that, for instance, conventional sources of funding, certainly those from research councils that I work with in the UK, are less able to do. So it's an important niche area that Cifar does in enabling this interdisciplinary work, but also curiosity-driven work.
Thanks very much. I'd like to now move to some of the advances that are actually taking place in the fields that you collectively work in that relate to climate change. Jackie, let's begin with you. What's actually happening out there?
Yeah, I mean, one advance that's really, so I'm an environmental microbiologist, and I look a lot at the ecology of microorganisms in various environments, including permafrost systems. Permafrost has a lot of carbon, and microorganisms are the mediators of that carbon. One relatively recent advance is just realizing that microorganisms may be mitigating more greenhouse gases than we previously thought. For example, there's a group of methanotrophs. These are methane-eating microorganisms that were really just quite controversial. Their existence was quite controversial until just a short time ago. It was debated whether or not they even existed. But now we can see their presence in some systems where actually they're consuming more methane than is being produced from that environment. We're also seeing huge paradigm shifts about where and when greenhouse gases may be produced. For example, for a very long time, it was assumed that methane could only be produced when you were in an oxygen-deprived environment, an anoxic environment. We're now seeing that actually very oxygen-rich environments, so a large portion of our planet, may produce methane. And so as an environmental microbiologist, we're finding out that there's still lots to learn simply about the microbial inhabitants of these environments and how they may contribute or mitigate some of these greenhouse gases contributing to climate change.
David, your work's in machine learning, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who imagine that there could be great things that machine learning and artificial intelligence could bring to climate change, but give us a little bit of a sense of what's happening in your field.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And it's a pleasure to be part of this discussion. So I think it's worth noting that a lot of the machine learning and AI that makes the news isn't the AI that's having an impact on people's lives, either in the climate space or in many other spaces. And AI is not some futuristic technology. It's something that's being used across society right now. We're seeing the kinds of work being done in the climate space, including everything from satellite imagery processing algorithms being used by the UN to pinpoint where floods are happening and intervene, to forecasting algorithms being used to reduce energy waste in the electrical grid. And in terms of research breakthroughs that I'm particularly excited about, I'm really looking at ways to integrate domain-specific knowledge, everything from system physics to information about location, where the data is gathered, other kinds of knowledge which has been gathered by hard-won experience across different domains of application, and integrate that into machine learning. Because too often machine learning is very data-driven, which is great, but really neglects the effect of interdisciplinary collaboration in driving a new form of innovation, which incorporates knowledge from different domains together.
And I would say that that's actually right at the very heart of everything that Cifar does, is to build those interdisciplinary linkages as much as possible. Richard, tell us a little bit about your area of work, but also in so doing, what are the things that make it hard to accomplish the work and to advance research that may help us address climate change?
Well, one of the key challenges really on acting on climate change is an old one. And it relates in part also to Sarah's work as well. You know, will we be able to feed ourselves? Water resources are declining in many of the world's most productive fruit growing regions. Close to me here in the California Central Valley of the US, Northwest India, the North China Plain. And with global warming affecting these rainfall patterns, leading to fewer but heavier rainfalls, this impairs rain-fed agriculture. And this is particularly important in low-income countries across the tropics. But it also increases global water demand for irrigation. And major questions are, where is this water going to come from? And with these changes in our rainfall patterns, how we're going to need to store more water. And also we have the risks of contamination associated with that. And so there are major challenges that that I find in terms of the research activity, is taking, if you want to call it, innovations that are arising from research and getting them into practice. And those are the research into practice is really one of the major challenges in doing that effectively.
So thanks very much, Richard. You mentioned Sarah's work, and I'll come to you, Sarah, right now. Tell us some of the challenges that you face in your interest in food and fungi in actually making the kind of progress that we need.
Yes, so thank you very much. Richard's comments really have just highlighted the strength of Cifar in catalyzing collaboration between really disparate subjects. So for me, fungi are absolutely beguiling and also rather horrifying because they are really the most important agents of crop disease. When you think about the calories that we eat, which is rice and wheat and maize and potatoes and soybean being the top 5 ones, each of those is challenged by a different fungal disease. And what we can see, sadly, since the inception of the Green Revolution is that we're planting great monocultures. I think the largest field is actually a wheat field in Alberta, which is 14,000 hectares in size, where we've planted genetically uniform wheat, guarded by one inbred resistance gene and sprayed by antifungals. So what happens is the pathogen nimbly adapts itself to become almost, it sees itself as having a pleasurable feeding and breeding ground, and it literally goes quite mad, eating through its vulnerable crops. Unfortunately, what we can also see is that fungi are very nimble in terms of how plastic they are. So they can fast forward evolution in terms of becoming not only resilient against the crops, but they can adapt to temperature. So they're temperature adapting. And also, sadly, they're also adapting to moisture, meaning that they can perceive, if you like, dramatic weather. So not only have we got temperature rise problems, but we've also got the incidence of dramatic weather leading to adaptations in the fungal genome. So what can we do about it? Well, I think the most important thing is firstly to raise awareness. And I think if you went out into the streets in Toronto and did a survey of 1,000 people and asked them about disease, everyone would come up with a human disease like malaria or COVID or HIV. I don't think 1 in 1,000 would even think about the implication of fungal diseases on crops compromising our calories. So it's a really extraordinary thing that we have to do to raise awareness of the plight of plants to fungal disease.
So we've got a sense both of raising awareness of where the risks are, and also a sense that turning our research results into practice is a fundamental challenge. But there's also this challenge that a couple of you have noted already of transforming what we know into policy that can actually move us in the right sorts of directions. And I mentioned a couple of times, we've mentioned that COP28 is taking place in just a few days. And I'm curious, and I'll come to both Jackie and David on this one. do either of you feel hopeful that the researchers and policymakers, world leaders who are coming together at COP will actually be able to address climate change in effective ways in the shorter term? David, why don't I start with you?
I'm not especially hopeful, but where I do take hope is in remembering that climate change is not an on-off switch. Every bit of work that we do, every bit of progress that we make is having an impact on people's lives. Many people have died as a result of climate change already, and millions more will die regardless of what we do, but we get to choose how many millions that is. And I am hopeful that there will be some progress achieved at the COP and more broadly in the policy space, because we have been seeing that. Will it be enough to steer us towards the best or even one of the better pathways for the global climate? That remains to be seen. And the role of probably all of our work is in making some of those lines for action easier, not in replacing policy, which is necessary, fundamentally necessary, but in making policy actions easier, increasing the knowledge that people have, and decreasing barriers to action. But there are still barriers to action. Society needs to make various choices. Those are hard choices, and we're making some of them slowly and imperfectly, not enough, not fast enough, but whatever we do counts, and whatever everybody does counts. We really need all hands on deck here.
Thanks. Jackie, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way as David. I maybe have a bit more of an optimistic lens. But I think that's because I choose to focus on some of these imperfectly implemented, moments of progress that we're seeing. And I'm seeing these moments of progress more and more. And that's what's giving me a lot of hope, is it's getting increasingly easier to see progress, to hear those good climate action stories. And I think that is in part because it's more prevalent in the social narrative. It's very common to hear about climate change at the dinner table, whereas before it was almost, scientists screaming into a void. But that void is now a lot of citizens who are writing their MPs, who are insisting that their politicians try to take action. And I agree that it's not perfect, but I do see those moments of hope. And I do think that we have the potential to increase that momentum, and I'm hopeful that we can do that as a human species.
Thanks. And I want to go back into the perception of risk in climate change, which we've already begun to address. But if we want to be explicit about it, we have threats to human health, we have threats to wildlife, to various ecosystems, to food. Really, every aspect of life on the planet, including human life, can be affected by climate change. And so every now and then, of course, that makes it seem overwhelming. And it also means that setting priorities can be a bit difficult here, especially research priorities. I'm curious, Sarah, how do you think research could actually help set public priorities, and how can we try to ensure that people are really working to move in the same direction or to push in the same direction?
Well, I speak with complete bias and perhaps a little UK-centric at this point, but my motivation now is, having written a plethora of different papers about this topic, is to push from science into translation and to policy. And I'm really happy that the UK government, or the English government, but not yet the Scottish government, have embraced gene editing. So suddenly we're beginning to get an understanding about, if we make climate smart plants, we might be able to make them more resilient to agriculture. So what we need now to do is to roll this out on the world stage. So not only climate smart plants, but also raising awareness of the plight of plants, as I've said before, to different diseases. So we're very good in the medical world and huge amounts of publicity, as we've seen over the tragedy of COVID. But what we don't know enough about is the impact of diseases on our crops. So I think for us in Cifar, I think we have to shout with one voice as loud as we can about education across all scales of ages, right from primary schools through universities up to us older folk making a huge noise if we can politically.
So absolutely, there seems to be a shared, I think, impetus from all of you that we have to be louder, we have to be coordinated, we have to take our research and get it out into the world. Richard, do you think research has the capacity to short circuit slow-moving policy and political environments? We do, you're right, Jackie, there are conversations over the dinner table, but at the same time, when you look at polling data, a lot of it is starting to show that, strangely, climate change is falling back on the political agenda in comparison to worries around cost of living, worries around job losses, etc. So, Richard, I'm just curious, how do you think research can help us make sure that climate change remains in the forefront of our thinking?
Well, maybe taking it out of the hands of the politicians slightly. So I think what we're seeing now is there's an increased trend, if you will, to more participatory research. We know there's the expression is citizen science that people are using at times. There's also this trend towards transdisciplinary research. So that's research that directly involves user communities in its conception and in its implementation. And I think that these approaches, that research that that kind of transdisciplinary research has the capacity to inform change led by people, not necessarily by politicians. And I think if you look over over our past, it's really ordinary people showing what is possible that is responsible for much of the progress we see in our society. So, of course, we're going to need an enabling environment that's provided by policy and politicians, and that's kind of essential to sustain the change. But maybe what you're talking about, raising awareness, maybe we can do that with research teams working more directly with user communities, and in essence, showing up the politicians for a lack of leadership on this. And I just think that perhaps it's researchers coming together with user communities as one way to do this. Sadly, the political motivation and policy environment often follow rather than lead on these. And certainly, I mean, the COP20, the COP process that we are observing is reflecting this. I was at COP27 last year, and I found, and I really found that the public voices outside of the COP were more progressive and more advanced than the discussion going on. And I have a very vivid memory of sitting in a session in the American Pavilion where there was this indigenous speaker. He was a hereditary chief from indigenous people of the Amazon, as Chief Ninawa. And he was speaking, and his arguments for nurturing a more resilient earth were very direct, very clear, but I felt very few people in the room were listening.
That's worrisome. Jackie, anything you'd want to add on that? Ways in which research could actually better direct and inform both politics and public policy?
Yeah, I really agree with what Richard is saying. And, community-driven, working with communities, working with Indigenous partners in Canada in particular is something that we're seeing more and more of. But there's also, I think, a greater ability for scientists to speak directly through social media, through panels such as this one, to very broad groups of people. And in some ways, we don't need to, write a white report that then gets submitted to a politician who maybe read it. We can give our results directly to communities if we're good at translating that information. And as Richard said, a lot of change throughout human history is being driven by regular people, by groups of people, and empowering and educating, as Sarah says, I think has a lot to do with that.
I'd like to switch gears a little bit and encourage each of you to be able to dig deeper into your own work and share, as you say, some of those results, Jackie. I'll start with you, David, because I don't have to tell anyone that AI is a pretty hot topic these days, not always for the best of reasons. And there's some really rather strange ideas that I think have evolved about what AI can do or should not do. But it does seem to be the case that machine learning and AI more broadly might enable us to accelerate breakthroughs in key areas of research, including in climate change. So could you tell us a little bit, David, about ways in which rapid advances in AI might actually enable us to move more quickly?
Absolutely. And maybe just to make sure we're all on the same page here, let me just quickly define AI. AI is, according to the official OECD definition, any computer approach or algorithm that makes predictions or recommendations, etc., on the basis of a defined set of objectives. You'll notice this is not referring specifically to most of the very specific and well-covered AI approaches, which are in the news and around the dinner table right now. And in fact, algorithms like GPT are not really relevant to, they're not relevant to my own work at all. And we're not really seeing them making positive impacts on the climate, at least not specifically. There are broader effects on society, many negative, some positive, which will impact the climate. And we can talk about that later. But really, we should think of a lot of the AI that's impacting the climate, as I mentioned before, being unflashy algorithms that are extremely impactful and are quite powerful, but are generally powerful in doing very specific things. So 4 themes that we see are AI helping distill large, unstructured data sets into useful, usable information. That could be for policymakers, for other kinds of decisions. Some examples from my own group, we work extensively in biodiversity monitoring, where we have sensory modalities and sensor systems, which are in the field and can be used to gather large amounts of data on ecosystems, on species populations, and then that data can be processed at scale using AI to provide information to guide land use decisions, to guide conservation approaches, etc. We also work on forest monitoring, so quantification of carbon stock, understanding how much carbon is stored in different areas of land and trees across Canada and the world. The second theme that we see is in optimization and control, where AI approaches can be used, for example, to control or provide recommendations for managing the electrical grid to run much more efficiently, use less energy. And that's something that we've worked on in our own group as well. We see uses for AI in forecasting, for example, in predicting crop yield based upon satellite imagery and past data to understand where there are going to be potential food insecurities moving forward as extreme weather threatens crop production. And we also see AI helping in scientific modeling and discovery. We're working closely, for example, with Environment and Climate Change Canada to integrate particular kinds of AI to speed up Canada's climate and weather models, where there are pieces that are just extremely slow, taking months to run, even on a supercomputer. And AI can help reduce the computational bandwidth there, make something much more scalable, and help guide local interventions and decision-making as a result. We're also using AI to help speed up discovery of new materials for low-carbon energy applications, like electrocatalysts, for example, for synthesis of electrofuels. Now, it's worth noting, these applications are not somewhere in the future, the vast majority of them are currently being integrated into applications or being used around the world to increasingly powerful effect. This is not something that I'm talking about AI might help. In most cases, AI is already helping. It's helping sometimes in smaller ways that need to be scaled up. And there's huge room for improvement on the computer science side, and in particular on the domain integration and deployment side. But these are the ways that we're seeing progress being made and continuing to advance.
That is encouraging, David, despite your earlier perhaps careful not wishing to be overly optimistic. There seem to be some really productive areas where AI can be helpful here. Thank you for that. Sarah, I'm curious, has AI had an impact on your work in addressing fungal disease?
Yes, I suppose David's given me a real wake-up call to the fact that I actually probably do use AI in the computer predictions that we use to model the movement of crop pests and pathogens, and also to see where we might grow our plants more sensibly to get our crops or to get our foodstuffs. So I think integrating very large global data sets has indeed used AI. Hitherto, we've been stunningly slow at these predictions because of the limit in computer capacity. So only a couple of years ago, it took us 3 weeks of supercomputer time at the Met Office, so the meteorological office here in Exeter, just to get a pretty crude model out. And we put hundreds of different parameters in, looking at the movement of fungi in concert with climate change and with their crops. And we knew we'd gone completely wrong because after 3 weeks, we found out that we should be planting coconuts in Russia. So we knew that we'd gone completely wrong in terms of some of the inputs. So I think if it can be speeded up, and indeed, if I can speak with David out with this conversation, I think we could do better still.
You were already producing transdisciplinary work in live time. This is exciting. Jackie, I want to move on to your work a little bit. There was a profile that was published on Cifar's website recently about your work, and we refer in that to a carbon bomb that could potentially be unleashed from the underground. Tell us about your research and how you are helping us to understand that risk better.
Yeah, so maybe I'll start off with just describing permafrost, and that's where this carbon bomb is potentially going to be unleashed from. So permafrost is ground that's being frozen or below 0 degrees Celsius for at minimum 2 years, but typically it's hundreds to thousands of years. And it is about 27% of the terrestrial surface of our planet, or 50% of Canada. So a large portion of Canada is underlain by permafrost. And that permafrost is storing 1,700 petagrams of carbon. And so that's the equivalent of all of the carbon in terrestrial vegetation currently. So all of the plant matter is the equivalent carbon is locked away in permafrost. There's concern that as this permafrost is thawing for the first time in many thousands of years, that carbon is going to become newly available for microorganisms that are also in these soils to metabolize and to eat. As a byproduct of microorganisms' metabolism, or what they're munching on, is potentially greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and methane. And of course, those greenhouse gases that would potentially get released would further warm the climate, which would further cause more melting of permafrost or thawing of permafrost, which would just kind of create this positive feedback loop, which once you reach a tipping point would just potentially unleash all of this carbon all at once. And it's very hard to mitigate the actions of microorganisms. You can't really tell them to stop that. What my research is doing is really just trying to do some fundamental ecology on these microorganisms. When do they produce these greenhouse gases, or when might they eat some of these greenhouse gases, because they also have the potential to use methane as a food source or use carbon dioxide as the food source. And we see some places in the Canadian Arctic where we have a net methane sink, which is to say that these microorganisms are consuming atmospheric levels of methane. So even if there's no methane being produced, they can actually sequester it from the atmosphere. So our work is really trying to understand the when and the where and the who in terms of the microorganisms a bit better. And this directly, would relate to carbon budgets, we think. So if we can't fully understand the natural emissions, how can we really budget how much we have to offset our carbon if we're not accounting for it? So it becomes a potential contributor to carbon accounting.
And just to go back to the AI question, then for you, presumably you are dealing with huge data sets that would have global inputs. Are you directly using machine learning in your work, or are you relying on others to do the number crunching, if I may put it that way?
I'm not using AI in particular, although maybe like Sarah, I'm realizing I may be using machine learning more than I realize, because I do use models. But I would say right now, we're actually really limited with boots on the ground data. A lot of the literature just calls permafrost permafrost because it's defined by temperature. But of course, permafrost, much like soil in my backyard versus Sarah's backyard or Richard's backyard, have different properties. They have different geologic histories, different carbon content. And we need a lot more data about these different types of permafrost that we, as a scientific community, simply don't have yet.
Fascinating. Richard, your work goes in a really quite different direction in that your, as I understand it, work is about harnessing the output of climate change, specifically heavy rainfall, in order to address climate inequalities in equatorial tropics. So it seems to me you've got quite a unique perspective on how severe rainfall events can be both a blessing and a curse. So tell us more about that, please.
Yeah, so the field research that I have conducted with research institutions in tropical Africa and South Asia, it shows that groundwater is replenished primarily by heavy rainfalls. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change defines those as greater than 10 millimeters per day. And so the widespread transition that we are seeing towards fewer but heavier rainfalls, and that's a direct consequence of global warming, increases the renewability of groundwater in many environments, and especially in the tropics, where this amplification of climate or rainfall or precipitation extremes are most pronounced. So I often get this when I give talks on this. So you think climate change is a good thing? No. Look, associated increases in the frequency and duration of droughts, the increased frequency and intensity of floods, these are all wholly undesirable consequences and can be terrifically destructive. But, it's basically trying to draw upon the reality is it's happening. Now, what do you do? How do you respond to that? And understanding how global warming affects water balances is vital, and the idea that we can see that the understanding how these water balances change in response to warming is really fundamental, and it's particularly important in drylands and in tropical drylands where many of the world's lowest income countries reside. And in these environments, groundwater is often the only perennial or year-round source of water. So the idea that this shift towards fewer but heavier rainfalls may actually increase the renewability of groundwater is fundamentally important. Yeah.
Sarah, people are talking a lot about pathogens in our world, but they're often talking about viral pathogens. Your work is in fungal pathogens, which is also having a bit of a moment because of television programs such as The Last of Us about a fungal disease that creates zombies. That's not your work, I know that, but there is a real issue around the spread of fungal disease having potentially global impact. You've already given us a little hint of the work that you do, but tell us more about what you think are both the threats and potential opportunities that fungi present.
Okay, so let's start with good things about fungi. So however bleak and however grim this story, The Last of Us, is or was, at least it raised awareness about fungi, and nothing is really completely bad about fungi. So we can also, I guess, naively call them our friends, because without fungi, we wouldn't have beta-lactam antibiotics, citric acid, immunosuppressants, statins. We wouldn't have our knowledge of the cell cycle. We wouldn't have had 3 Nobel Prizes awarded to the science of fungi, etc. So there are good things. They're good in bioremediation and all sorts of things. However, they're also the greatest pathogens of crops, as I've said. So we can look at their movement by what we've done is something rather unusual. So in the 1900s or so, there was this concept put about called the disease triangle. And the disease triangle concept simply says that, very naively, when a host is susceptible, i.e. it doesn't have any resistance genes in the crop, for example, the pathogen is abundant and virulent, and the climate conditions are right for the growth of the pathogen, then you get disease. So what we've done, perhaps rather naively, is we've parameterized each of these nodes in a temporal sense too, so we can now project forwards to look at the movement of these crop pests and pathogens. And in so doing, we've been able to do it at a global scale, as well as a landscape scale, and with individual diseases. So, for example, the greatest pathogen of rice is a fungus called Magnaportha, rice blast disease. And considering that rice feeds half the world's population, what we can now do is predict where this pathogen will be, not only as the crop moves, but also in concert with climate change. So we're beginning to raise awareness so that we can then instigate crop protection strategies and inform governments about where they might predict new diseases will occur. And this has had an impact in India, in China, and in Madagascar, where actually Madagascar are thinking quite seriously about planting yams rather than growing rice because of the threat of disease. So suddenly the science is beginning to be translational enough to affect policy.
Fascinating. I want to connect the work of Richard and Sarah around the question of food security, if I may. Obviously, both depletion of groundwater, fungal pathogens could be major threats to food security globally. And there's no doubt that they're being exacerbated by climate change. How you both referred, and especially Richard, to interdisciplinary, or you use the term transdisciplinary collaboration. Say a little bit more about the ways in which working across disciplines can help us address these complex issues. Richard, I'll start with you, and then I'll come back to you, Sarah.
Well, addressing, I mean, what the transdisciplinary work is. And when we use that term, we're talking about not only interdisciplinary science, but also the participation of the stakeholder communities that obviously would use this information. And the work that I do, the science of the, if you want to call it the hydrological science, is just one part. And that's not necessarily going to affect change. We have issues around equity of access. Equity is a huge challenge, and understanding how in a specific context we are not continuing to disadvantage, if you will, poor communities. So for instance, depending on their the environment in which they are living in, whether the if you want to call it, ensuring that adaptation to climate change is not actually making their situation worse, while we are privileging perhaps people who are coming from wealthier communities. In fact, I see this even in the COP processes, where we talk about loss and damage, and how do we compensate lower income countries who are, you know, in a kind of climate justice perspective. And we talk about funds, and they're thinking about funds for investors. So when you have that image that that funding is going to actually target those poor, less well communities, and you know, you could imagine a kind of classic framing of someone living in coastal Bangladesh. This is not the way that climate finance is working at the moment. So if you want to call it we have to kind of move beyond our individual science. If we're going to inform policy effectively, we have to move beyond our individual science. So I'm primarily a physical scientist working in hydrogeology and hydrology, but I work very closely with people who look at the political dimensions of this, say transboundary aquifers and transboundary river basins, and also people who are experts in understanding the equity of any of the proposed solutions to this. And so it's really fundamental that you have all sides participating in this kind of work. Otherwise, you may lead to what are maladaption, I guess, is the word that people are using most frequently for this. So yes, I'll end there.
Thank you, Richard. Sarah, examples of where you think collaboration across disciplines really makes a difference in your work?
So for me, it's the pure joy of realizing that I can ask a relatively naive question and someone can help me with sums that are way beyond my brain. So for example, I can say, I have got all this data, it's dirty, can you help me clean it up? Then can we do something naive? Can we rank the order of importance of the different factors? So it will be like me taking a handful of sand and throwing it into the air and saying, could you please model in n-dimensional space the relationship between the individual grains of sand, each being a data point? And I've been delighted that the mathematicians in Oxford and also my colleagues in Exeter have said, yes, we can do that. And then they've grown in confidence, and suddenly we've got transdisciplinary discussions where we're talking to and at each other, understanding perhaps 50% of what we see, but seeing 100% of the implication of the outcome. And it's truly exciting.
That's great. We have quite a few questions coming in from people online, so let me get to some of those right now. And there's a cluster of questions that's building on, I think, Richard's earlier comment about the difficulty of moving from one's research into practical impact. And one person has asked a more pointed question, which is, as this person sees it, a rift between academia and the R&D sector in industry. And the assertion is that government is trying to bridge that, acts in the middle. And the person says that to him or her, the alignment of these stakeholders, that's academia, industry, and government, is one of the greatest challenges in climate change. I'm curious, any of you have observations about, do you agree that there is this rift between academia and industry, and how might we bridge it? I'm going to come back to you to start, Sarah, because I think probably in your field there may have been some conversations around this.
Yeah, so I think it's very topic dependent, and I think that all research should be for public good. But of course, our careers are launched on what we publish. And I think as I've gone through the system, it's become more and more open and more collaborative. However, it wasn't always so. And I think that many of us started our careers quite siloed. My experience also of industry is very topic dependent. So for example, almost all the fungicide discovery at the moment is done by large agrochemicals companies. And it really is data which is held out with the public domain, and everything is for profit. Now, I think that we need a very large global initiative that says, no, we have to protect our crops better and we have to make everything free at source for everybody. And that simply isn't happening, unfortunately.
David, you commented earlier about some of the difficulties of translation of work into policy. I'm curious, have you felt this disconnect between your work and industry, and is it something that you see possibilities for bridging?
Yes, absolutely. And it's something that I work closely, a space that I work closely in, because I also co-founded and co-lead a nonprofit called Climate Change AI that works on really facilitating the research through deployment pipeline for AI in climate change. many different challenges here. And one of the biggest ones that maybe doesn't get properly recognized is that there is a lack of trying to achieve the same thing sometimes between different stakeholders. And it is important to recognize, for example, if you are an AI person wanting to work on climate change, that you're going to have to abandon some of the traditional metrics for evaluation of success that you may be used to. You're going to have to abandon some of the traditional data sets, even some of the traditional methods. The way in which the culture of AI is set up is such that it's designed to promote innovation in ways that are easily quantifiable and that are easily interconvertible across different kinds of problems. And that's just not the way that the world works often. You have to spend a while sitting down with the relevant stakeholders, understanding what metrics for success they have. The metrics for success may be reliability across different kinds of regimes. And the notion of reliability that they have may be different from the notion of reliability and robustness that you have in AI. They may be interested in working across different geographic regimes in extremely low data settings. Those may be regimes that you are used to in very stereotyped contexts, but not in the field. And there are new challenges which occur in the field. And so these are some of the challenges which we see in bridging this gap. This is one of many challenges. We need to have more incubation of projects that bring together different stakeholders so that they understand the relevant challenges and aren't working to solve the wrong problem. We have so much, there is so much that needs to be done. But on the other hand, the desire to help can easily be diverted into something that sounds good, but isn't actually solving problems that people really need.
Thank you. Jackie, a related question, but perhaps a bit broader. In your work, you're obviously producing information that could have a big impact on how we address climate change from the perspective of these organisms existing within the permafrost. Do you feel that there are big barriers in getting that information out, getting the data out, getting the learning that you are creating in your research into places where it can be actioned, if I may put it that way? What are the barriers for you, if any?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And if I'd been asked that question a year ago, my answer probably would have been different. A year ago, I would have probably said, well, I do an experiment, I make a measurement, I publish a paper, and therefore it's out there, and hopefully the right stakeholder will uptake it. Which is not a great way to get that information out there at all. And so, I think in terms of the barriers, it's the knowing who those stakeholders are, identifying them, and making sure that you're actually communicating with them. I work now with government partners, with the Geological Survey of Canada and Environmental and Climate Change Canada, for example, different Indigenous partners who have a great interest in our findings as well. And so having talks with those stakeholders and presenting that work and those results in a language that is easier to digest. I think scientists often get really, in the nitty-gritty details and the semantics, but it actually acts as a barrier for the uptake of some of that information, which may not be as important for some of your stakeholders. And so I think for me, as an early career researcher, my earlier barriers were just trying to figure out the who. How do you get that information out there effectively? And actually, this is something that Cifar really helped me with, and identifying stakeholders and putting me in the room with some of these stakeholders as well to get to talk to them directly.
It's a major focus for a new strategy for Cifar to try to address that whole question of how to facilitate impact more directly. A completely different question, which is really about education and education at earlier stages. The person who's asking this question is concerned that we may not be providing the right skill sets for children as they go through elementary and secondary school, or primary and secondary school, to set them up to be addressing the kinds of issues that they are going to face. This is a tough question. I'm going to go to you, Sarah. Do you have any thoughts on whether our education system broadly is setting us up for success in addressing these kind of tough challenges like climate change?
So for me, I think the most important thing is to endow a child with enough confidence to stand up and speak, and that's not something we're doing particularly well as they're so busy with all their computers, etc. The other thing I feel very passionately about is the lack of plant biology in the curriculum. So everything can be storytelling. I mean, we only have to think about the tragedy of the Irish potato famine and the fact that it affected Canada dramatically, as 1 million people starved due to the potato disease and 1 million emigrated to the New World, not least to Canada. So I think it's to do with storytelling and in giving the young folks huge confidence to stand up and speak with a passion about something that's interesting.
I'm sure we could have a whole panel on this subject, but unfortunately we are starting to run out of time. And I want to ask each of you one final question, which is really just for you to identify one small or large action that you think you can take in your work that really advances our ability to address climate change. What's the thing that gives you a sense of purpose, if I may put it that way, in the work that you're undertaking? I'll start with you, Richard.
What gives me a sense of purpose really is that is realizing or identifying and realizing solutions, and doing that in a cooperative way. And at the beginning of my career, and getting back to a bit to the educational point of view, I mean, groundwater doesn't feature in a curriculum. I have first-year students that come to university, and groundwater has almost never been mentioned in their education to that date. And yet, you know, it's fundamentally important to not only our water supplies, but our food supply. And so what I get excited about is working with colleagues and finding that the role that groundwater can play in helping to moderate the impacts or adapt to the impacts of climate change. And we've had some real successes in enabling sustaining food production and enabling or maintaining and sustaining access to safe water supplies, and that is terribly fulfilling. At the same time, I'm very nervous that we don't recognize particularly the climate injustice, meaning the fact that people in low-income countries across the tropics and even in the high Arctic are really disproportionately impacted by climate change. And here I am in California, people in Toronto and other locations think, oh, well, maybe it's not such a big deal. Well, it's a bigger deal further away from where you are, and that our own emissions are having that impact far from where we live. So I guess it's realizing some success in adaptations is a big thrill.
That's great. And the rest of you are now off the hook because we're running out of time, I'm afraid. And I want to turn it back over to Hannah Jacobi for final words before we break. But let me just say thank you to each of our panelists. Back to you, Hannah.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen, and thanks very much to our panel. This has been such a lively and fascinating discussion. To our audience as well, thank you so much for being here today and for joining us from 5 different continents and so many different time zones. I welcome you to visit our website at cifar.ca to find out more about this event series. And as I've mentioned before, you'll be able to view a recording from today on our website in about a week in case you'd like to watch it again or share it with your community. Finally, if you'd like to find out more about the researchers who participated today and learn about their work, I encourage you to visit our website at cifar.ca and read the interviews and stories that we have with them in our series called Nurturing a Resilient Earth. Thank you very much. Take care, and until next time.